give you this story. With persistent power cuts turning our lives upside down, one of the things we hardly talk about is what this does to the food we store in fridges. Now, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases is bringing food safety concerns to the fore. Let's speak to the NICD's Juno Thomas about this. She joins us now live just to speak to us. Juno, before I talk to you about the risk in terms of consumed food and, what this does in terms of sitting in the fridges that have no power, just talk to me about the breaking down of the cold chain. That obviously creates bacteria around food, especially such as meat. So essentially, all South Africans, especially with 10 hours of no power a day, we might be consuming poison.
Thank you for inviting me. So, yes, I mean, foodborne pathogens are definitely affected by the cold chain. So whenever there's a break in maintenance of the cold chain, and this is throughout the whole food chain, from production or harvest all the way to when it reaches the plate on your table. And disruptions in the cold chain, especially for perishable foods, is hugely problematic because it allows what we call pathogens or germs that can cause disease to grow in certain kinds of foods. And so it's important, I think, for load shedding purposes. Obviously, it affects consumers, it affects the food that you keep in your fridge at home, but it also affects other food vendors and establishments that store food on site, and then obviously the retailers and even the producers. So it's perishable foods that will bear the brunt of increased risk for foodborne disease from particularly bacteria.
So, I actually didn't think of it the way that you've just put it, that it actually starts from production in terms of perishable foods, that, the agriculture sector is also hit by load shedding. They already complain. Then it goes to the stores. They're also hit by load shedding. So by the time it gets to my hand as a customer, it's probably already bad for me to consume.
So I think there are two important things to bear in mind. One is that there's a difference between what we call spoilage and what is potentially contaminated food. And spoilage is when food looks obviously rotten and starts to decay. And then there's potentially contaminated food, which can have bacteria in that is able to make you ill, but the food doesn't necessarily look or smell or taste bad. So it's obvious with spoiled food that you're going to throw it away. You shouldn't be consuming it in any case. It's more difficult with food that is contaminated but still looks and smells and tastes okay. Yeah. And that is particularly problematic with meat, fresh meat, and poultry and fish, and eggs, and cheese also to an extent. So I think the most important things are to try and when you buy the food, buy your fresh poultry, meat, fish, and eggs, and your cheeses last, and then make sure that you go straight home, you put them in the refrigerator, and try and eat perishable foods as quickly as possible. So this might mean that you rather buy smaller portions more frequently than buying larger portions that will last you slightly longer. And I think that way you're less likely to run into problems of having bacteria that are already present in the food, by the time it reaches your home, growing when you have times of load shedding.
Just very quickly, because we don't have much time, I have to take the viewer back to Soweto for a breaking news story. What advice would you give me and the viewer at home in terms of especially having a 4-hour-long load shedding schedule, sometimes 10 hours per day like we're going through right now? Should we perhaps not buy groceries in bulk at the moment?
So, I mean, that's difficult because then you don't necessarily have the space to store your perishable foods properly. And, it's likely that they'll just spoil if you've got prolonged load shedding anyway. The most important thing is, I think, just try and keep your fridge door closed. During load shedding, try not to open it at all. To keep the temperature low, and try and make sure that your fridge is working correctly, and ideally is running at about 4 degrees Celsius.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. That's the NICD's Juno Thomas speaking to us there about how load shedding is even affecting the food you and I consume.